Today, we're interviewing a man with one of the coolest mustaches. Now, slightly trimmed because of COVID, but pre-COVID, it was pretty epic. And I got to say, I might just want to grow one of these myself. But we're not here to talk about mustaches. Today, we're interviewing Matthew Turner, who is a British author who lives in the small town of Yorkshire, England. Having previously published 3 novels, nonfiction, business books, he wrote this new book that we're going to be talking about, Beyond the Pale. And it's basically, after interviewing hundreds and hundreds of entrepreneurs, investors, and thought leaders, he gained insight into how mindsets, flow, personal development, and gaining reputation and crafting this awesome story in this book about how we as individuals can grow, can learn in a way that allows us to have wholeness, allows us to have freedom without this idea of having to grind ourselves to death in order to have success. So today, Matthew, thank you for joining us on the Whole Person Podcast. How are you?
Oh, I am good. Thank you so much for having me. And yes, a slightly trimmed down version of the mustache, as you might say. When you don't leave the house, the motivation to twizzle the mustache isn't quite as great. Right. It's still there.
Well, and just for those that are listening, it's not by choice he doesn't leave the house. He is in England and they are still on lockdown. And so it's not like he's scared to step out of his house by any means. So we're just throwing that out there I forgot what that's called, but for the people that wanted to know.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Not most days, yeah. And hopefully by the time this episode comes out, we will be out of lockdown, but hey, we shall see. Time will tell. But I'm really excited to join you today, and I thank you very much for having me on your show.
You bet. Well, I have some questions here lined up for you, but before I ask those questions, just give us a brief background about who you are. Where have you kind of developed into writing, and why you wanted to choose writing Beyond the Pale?
Sure. So, as you mentioned, I'm from England and I've lived here my whole life. And I suppose I was brought up in a very sort of average, typical way. Nothing out of the ordinary. And I was led to, believe what we're supposed to believe and pursue the whole work-life balance and pursue a version of success, which I think is very everyday and ordinary. And it led me through school and to go to university, and I studied in my background in marketing. And I turned to writing in my early 20s as kind of a form of therapy after a pretty rough breakup. And I just started writing to better appreciate things and to just kind of get thoughts out. Up until then, I was very good at being a pretty closed book. Still am for the most part, but I found through writing, I was able to just let certain parts of me out into the open, and it allowed me to get the confusion from the head out into a more clear manner. That led me to write my first book, Beyond Parallel, which I'm very proud of. First novel, it was way back, pushing on 15 years when I started that. But, back then I wasn't really a writer. I was just someone putting words on a paper. In the time since, I developed my craft. I wrote more and more and more. I finished school. I got my master's degree in advertising and marketing. So I would be doing my fiction writing kind of at home, in and around my studies, just as a hobby. And then I was learning all about the world of marketing and branding and those kind of elements at school. Had a job, never really fit in that well in the employee world. I like to do my own thing. I like to kind of dive deep into my own thing. If it doesn't quite align with the boss, there'd always be a bit of friction there. So eventually I ended up becoming self-employed, and the original plan was to be kind of a marketing consultant or marketing coach, but I continued to write. So ever since I left my job, my sort of writing and my marketing has just crept ever closer. I wrote a couple of novels. I also wrote The Successful Mistake, which, as you mentioned, is when I interviewed a couple of hundred entrepreneurs about basically their biggest failure and how they turned it into success. I worked in various roles in the form of marketing. I would be writing about marketing, and I began to have this idea that one day I would love to be able to combine these two worlds, my fiction and non-fiction worlds. And I didn't really know how. And a couple of years ago now, slightly before I found out I was going to become a father for the second time to little Imogen, I came up with this idea of Beyond the Pale. And it's a business fable, and it is very much a fictional story. It's a novel, but it's written for business owners, entrepreneurs, people who spend a lot of time, I think, in the online realm, either working for themselves or for someone else. And I've interviewed certain people in it. So there's elements of nonfiction. There's a great deal of teachings in there, but it's all set in this fictional world. So through Beyond the Pale, I've managed to combine my fiction and my nonfiction, bring my writing and my marketing sort of expertise together. And yeah, it seems very aligned. And I can't believe I didn't really think of this book many years sooner.
You know, for those of you that are listening, what you just said is very critical. You take your passion and your skills, and when they intersect, it basically is your calling. And you've reached a spot in your life and in your career where, you know, your skills and your passions are all mingling at once. And a lot of us aren't there. What were some of the steps that led you to this spot? What are some of the lessons that you've had to learn and the failures that you had to go through to really just be able to intersect your passion for writing, your skill of marketing, the ideas between the two to get to this spot?
It's a good question. I call it wandering in the wilderness, and I spent years doing it, where I would try one thing, I would gravitate to this shiny object and then to the next one. And I kept just trying to follow all the supposed rules that us online folk are supposed to follow. This lead magnet, join this social media, follow this process, follow this tactic. And to an extent, I think I had to go through those wanderings to better appreciate what I do enjoy versus what I don't, what I am good at versus what I'm not. Beyond that, it really just comes down to persistence and resilience. I carried on writing fiction and releasing one novel after another. Even when I was trying to, find clients, I always made room for that because that was kind of like my dream. I always dreamed of getting to a point where my writing would be my living, but it would fuel the lifestyle that I dreamed of. And it wouldn't just be fictional writing and novels per se, there'd be nonfiction in there, but I wanted to get to a point where I wouldn't need to do client work. My passion, my dream, my purpose was always to have writing be that. And I'm still not there in that regard, but getting closer all the time. So for me, client work was always a means to an end, if you will. But I went about it so wrong for so long because I just kept on following all these should-haves and could-haves. And I kept trying to fit myself into the role that, you're supposed to follow. Oh, well, everyone's a coach these days, so become a coach. Everyone's got a podcast, have a podcast. Everyone's on this social media platform, get on that social media platform. And I was just throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. And in doing so, I kind of got caught up in the hustle and the grind, which is the overarching premise of Beyond the Pale. And I think to a degree, the vast majority of us fall into that because we're constantly online. We're constantly connected to our phones where we can check that email. There's so few barriers to entry in most industries these days that you can just test the waters and everything. What I mean by that is, go back 50, 60 years. If you wanted to start your own business, you would have to spend years saving up to start up that business, that brick and mortar. You would have to learn and get certain qualifications just to kind of, be whatever, be the consultant or anything. But the barriers to entry were high.
Right. And let's get even more specific. It's not even 50 years ago. It's just pre-internet age. I mean, that's,
Exactly.
I'm 33. So, I mean, internet came out maybe when I was like 8 or 9 or 10. So, I mean, it's not that long ago.
Yeah, you could probably have a case of like 20, 25, maybe like the late 90s is when maybe it started to change ever so slightly. But yeah, not long ago at all. So the barriers to most businesses, most industries, are really high. So if you wanted to do something, it was a serious decision. You had to get those qualifications. You had to save up that money. And for many people, that was like their one shot. They would dream of being a business owner. So they would save up for years, and then they would open that shop or they would open that business, and it would either work or it would not. And if it didn't, then they would go back and get a job, and maybe they'd try again, but it'd take another 5 or 10 years. But they certainly couldn't just test their hand in all these various different bathtubs. They had to choose one. These days, that's just not the case, because you can say, oh, I'm going to try coaching. I'll start a podcast. I'll start a YouTube channel. I'll see if I can do well on TikTok. Maybe I can write a book. Maybe I can create a course. Maybe I can do this. Oh, this isn't quite working, so I'll try this instead. And over the course of just 2 or 3 years, you can reflect and realize that, I've tried to wear 7, 8, 10, 15, 20 different hats over the last couple of years. And when you think about that logically,
right,
and you try to be so many different things, you try to be something for so many different people, is it any surprise that you don't become a master at any one thing? Like when you step back and just think about it logically, it's like, yeah, of course not. If you want to become good at something, you have to commit yourself to it. And if you're trying to commit yourself to 5 or 6 different somethings at any one time, well, it tells me one of 2 things, and probably a combination of the 2. One is that you aren't going to become good at anything because you're spreading yourself too thin. And 2, you're spreading yourself too thin. You're working harder than you need to. You're working longer than you need to. You're draining yourself. You're caught up in the hustle. You're constantly going to be switched on, comparing yourself to someone else, which makes you feel like you're more of a failure, which fuels that need to try something else so you can prove to yourself and to other people that you're not a failure, and so on and so on and so on. So for me, that's wandering in the wilderness. And I did it for, years. So to kind of...
Oh, go ahead.
So I was just going to say, to kind of come back to your original question of like how I escaped that, it's when I got more focused on what I was doing. And a big turning point for me was Imogen, my youngest, who's just turned 3 years old last week, actually. So as I say, I came up with the idea of Beyond the Pale probably, I don't know, a couple of months before I found out she was going to be part of this world. So I was just about getting ready to start the book, but then Imogen was caught, and I had to kind of put it on the side for a little while. But what having Imogen did to me, it forced me, because Imogen and so myself and Imogen's mother, we were just about starting to think of getting our own place, but it was going to be in like 6 months' time, and I was still able to try all these different things because I wasn't the pressure to bring in a set amount of money and to be there all the time. I have former partners, so I would have my weekends and things. So Imogen just forced me to go, right, over the next 6 months, I have to at least double my consistent income, probably more like triple it. And I'm going to need to work half as much. If I'm going to be the dad that I want to be, if I'm going to provide, if I'm going to be present, if I'm going to be there to help out in the lead up to the birth, during the birth, after the birth. That's what I need to do. So it just forced me to be real and go, right, I've been wondering all this time, what have I been good at? What are the things which I've enjoyed? What are the things which I've been good at? What are the things which people have valued and taken value from? What can I bring to the table? And instead of trying to do all these different things, I chose one thing. So I started to be a very specific something to my clients. In the past, I always seemed to have at least 2 books on the go. I always had like a fictional project and a non-fiction project. So I was like, no, I'm not going to be able to work on a book for a little while, at least until Imogen comes out and things settle down a little bit. But when that does happen, I'm going to focus on a book. And I'm going to focus on a book for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, whatever it's going to be. And there's not going to be another book. There's not going to be another side project. This is going to be like my personal project, and that's it. And for my clients, I can do this, and that's it. So I just forced myself to like choose something and to become something to someone rather than lots of things to lots of other people. And in doing so, I realized that I was good at writing. Like my passion, writing, it didn't have to just be the personal side thing. It's like that's generally what my clients valued the most when I was working with them. They appreciate what I brought into the table in that sense. So I just started to focus on that.
All right, so I'm going to ask this next question, and I want to, maybe you as a listener can relate to what I'm about to say, and we'll throw my life here under the bus, and we'll Matthew, pick it apart here. I totally get what you're saying, because right now I'm building a podcast, and the other thing I'm working on building is a YouTube channel. Some of it goes hand in hand. Some of it takes more focus on separate platforms. I'm also building a business, my real estate business. I'm also working now towards an opportunity to do some ministry stuff that I've always wanted to do my entire life since I was 7. And like you, I also want to be an author. I've started a book. I haven't touched it in about 4 or 5 months. So yeah, 4 or 5 months, because I just realized I don't have time for this right now as much as I want to. And it's actually looking pretty good. I gotta say, I'm better than I anticipated. So here's my question. There's so many things that I like and I want to do, but only one of them pays me. And the one that pays me isn't the thing I'm passionate about, or that, if I had my choice, I would drop that and make my money doing the other things. But the other things aren't making money, they're costing me money. So for someone like my situation, or who might be in my situation, how do we go about having the desires to do these things, but it's like the golden handcuffs. The thing that's paying me and doing well for me are the things that are handcuffing me from doing everything else.
It's a great question. And I think a very common situation, and very much one I was, in, and to an extent still am, because as I say, my dream has never been to do that. I like working with my clients. I like the client work I'm doing now.
Right.
Compared to the client work I did in the past, 3 or 4 years ago, what I'm doing today is a joy, because it's very much aligned with my passion of writing. But my dream is to get to a point where I have, a business. My role in it is writing, and, the books are what make the money, and there's a bit of a program beyond it. But I want to get to a point where client work isn't necessary to fuel my lifestyle. But right now it is. So for you, the thing that is paying you, but you would rather not be doing, is, that necessary evil. It's that means to an end. Mm-hmm. And we all have responsibilities, especially when you become, a mother or a father. You got to do what you got to do. So it's as simple as that. It's not just as easy as saying, I'm going to quit everything and money will sort itself out. The universe will align itself to me.
Right. Because people that say that are just stupid, and it doesn't actually don't take that advice from from the person from the stage who's like, just quit your job and go after your passion. Like,
Yeah.
don't do that.
No, don't do that. Honestly, one of the worst things you can do is to just follow your passion and presume it will work out one day. I mean, it might do, but it might not. So you've got to be realistic and you've got to be real with the situation. But one thing which I think helps me is I call it doing a time audit. So every single day you have 1,440 minutes. That equates to 10,080 minutes each week. So before you can fully appreciate where you want to go, you need to have a better understanding of where you currently are. So you can do this with like a spreadsheet, a pen and paper, but you literally come up with a list of everything you do on an average day, okay? And it doesn't have to be an exact science. Although if you want to get it in an exact science, you can. You can like track it over the next couple of weeks and literally dissect like, okay, I spent 10 minutes making breakfast. I spent 15 minutes in the shower. But you can generalize it and say, on average, each day I do, an hour email. I do 2 hours social media. I do 7 hours sleeping, right? And you don't want to add stuff up as you go along. You just want to kind of come up with this list. And as you're doing it, you give it one of three percentages. There's a 50% percentage, a 75%, and a 100%. So 100% refers to those essential tasks that you need to do and you are the only one who can do. So for instance, for me, it would be writing. It's a core task. It's fundamental to my living, and I'm the only one who can do it. The 75% task is something that is still somewhat important, although maybe it's not, but it's the kind of thing you could delegate, or it's the kind of thing you could get rid of, right? So social media, email, things of that nature. Not as important, they don't require your full focus. Someone else could probably do it for you, or at least part of it. And then there's those 50% tasks, which refer to the things which fill you up. So sleep would be one, exercise would be another, reading, meditation, yoga, anything that just brings you joy as well, okay? And there'll be certain things which maybe don't fit into any of them, like cleaning and stuff, but that kind of fits into like a 75% task. And the whole point here is it gives you a snapshot of what your day is like. And if you're like most people, you'll go through this and you'll say, I think I do 100 minutes of this and 100 minutes of that and 60 minutes here. And you'll add it all up and realize that it actually goes over that 1,440 minutes per day. So first of all, you're going, my perception of what I spend my time doing doesn't line up with reality. And two, you don't have anything left over. So you're like, damn, if I'm going to start making changes, for instance, if I want my podcast to work, if I want my YouTube channel to work, if I want to spend less time doing real estate and more time writing my book, then that is going to be nigh impossible because I don't have any time. But what it also does, it creates a very clear picture of how you're spending your time. So how much of that time is doing those 50% tasks that are giving you energy and filling you up? You might realize that you're not getting nearly enough sleep. You're not doing enough things which just bring you joy. And you might realize you're spending a whole lot of time doing those 75% tasks, which you kid yourself into pretending that they are essential. But when you're honest with yourself, it's like, okay, I've spent on average, an hour each day trying to make my TikTok channel work. But why am I doing my TikTok channel? Because it's the latest platform and everyone says you can make money using TikTok or Clubhouse, right? So I'm doing it because I feel like I have to. But why am I doing it? Is it actually going to help? So that's what the time audit does. One, it gives you a snapshot of like how much time you're spending on different things. But two, it gives it a value. You're able to start appreciate where you're spending your time, how you're spending your time. Once you know where you are, you can better appreciate what the next steps are going to be. You can start saying, okay, well.
Hold on. I want to pause you there, okay? And sure. Keep that. Because for those listening, I'm going to share something with our YouTube audience who can actually see this. But Matthew, I did a time audit last week. Look at that.
Nice. Very good.
See,
Yeah.
And so quickly, I'm just going to go over some of the stuff. I take my boys to school, come home, make coffee, get things set up for the day. I'll lead generate for about an hour. We have a baby as well. We have 3 boys, and so the baby's currently home. So my wife and I take turns watching him when other of us have meetings or phone calls. So that's in here. Spend lunchtime with my wife, watch a show, and then podcast, paperwork, go pick my son up, more paperwork, learn on YouTube through whether I'm watching real estate videos or something like that, learning how to grow a YouTube channel, whatever it is, go pick Levi up. And then what I did is I actually, like you were saying, I actually broke it down by color as well. So I could see in blocks of time, green makes me money. Yep. And then I started looking, there's only a little bit of green on here. And so now I'm thinking like, okay, well, how can I get more green on there and get rid of the yellow, get rid of the red, get rid of some of these other things so that, because the more money will allow me to hire virtual assistant, and a virtual assistant will give me then more time to do other things. So that's how I'm going about it. But now I'll go back to your train of thought because I want you to finish it. But I wanted to share that because, dude, this is pulling my heartstrings, man. Because I'm right there.
Yeah. Well, first of all, fantastic that you did that, and yeah, yours is a very slightly different shade of what I've just said, but it's the same purpose. It's giving you an idea of where you are. In terms of then where you want to go, there's no easy answer to that. Everyone's situation is different. But if we go back to when I was doing this, when I found out Imogen was coming into the world, it was like June, July time. So I started to, I had a very, in some ways, that pressure made it a lot simpler for me because I was like, well, she's going to be born in January, February time, right? So I was like, we need to have it all sorted out by then, but we want to be moved into somewhere new by like November, December, so we're settled. So in my mind, I was like, basically, in the next 90 days, I need to get to a point where I am making X amount. And then over time, over the next few months, I need to be able to start finishing earlier each day, because at this point I was just constantly working, tapping away on the laptop, doing calls and interviews and this, that, and the other at 9, 10 o'clock at night. And I was like, I need to bring that down. So I'm finished at 7 o'clock, like 8 times out of 10. But I'm not starting because I'd get out of bed and I'd still be working in bed at like 7 o'clock in the morning. But I was like, I need to, fit everything in between like 9 and 5. So I had some clear objectives and goals. And that then just forced me, right, well, if I only have so much time and I still want to have, this time for the 50% tasks, and I want to get better routines, better sleep and, still learning and filling my own cup, then what do I need to get rid of? And I realized that a lot of the 75% tasks, which I felt compelled to do, I didn't have to do. I didn't need to spend as much time. To be honest, lead generation, it might be a little bit different in your industry, being real estate. Maybe you do need to kind of constantly working on lead generation and topping it up. But with mine, I realized that I didn't need to spend as much time chasing leads. I just needed to like highlight some proper clients that would pay me good rates, get the conversation going with them, and just get 1 or 2 of them on board. I realized I didn't have to do it. Like a lot of the lead generation I was doing was just procrastination from actually doing the work. So I just found I made like a list of like 5 or 6 people, and I was like, I need a couple of these. And I did. I got a couple of them. A couple of very good ones, which spearheaded everything else that kind of went on in my life from there. But every time now I'm looking for a new client, I take the exact same approach. I'm not like throwing a bunch of stuff out there. I don't put myself in lead generation mode. I've just constantly got conversations going, and I just re-enter certain conversations with certain people. It's all I know is I only ever need like one new person, quality over quantity. And that was kind of the overarching thing for me. I knew that I was going to have to be focused more on quality than quantity. If anything that I was going to do, whether it was with a client, whether it was one of my own projects, whether it was something around marketing, I would have to be taking a quality first approach to it. Right now, I see Clubhouse everywhere, and I refuse to get on it because, one, it doesn't really align with me. I'm quite introverted. I don't like just getting off and sharing things off the cuff. It's a little bit different when it's a conversation like this. It's a back and forth. But I'm not one of these people who loves to just document my whole life. I'm using Instagram in a very specific way, specifically to try and lead up to the book. TikTok is definitely not for me. But for me, 3 or 4 years ago, I would be on TikTok. I would be on Clubhouse. And I'd be probably wasting, and I say the word wasting because that's exactly what I've been doing. I'd been wasting 30 minutes every day trying to make it work. Now I'm saving those 30 minutes hour each day because I know they won't work. Not
Right.
for me. It's not that they're bad platforms and they work for anyone, but I know me, and I know they're not going to bring enough value to me and what I do and how I approach things. So
It's fun. It's funny that you say that because just recently I took Facebook off my phone, and the amount of time I have saved is crazy stupid.
Yep.
Like in 1 week, my phone usage, and the only thing I changed on my phone was taking social media off.
Yeah.
I saved over 21 hours in a week.
Wow. It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah. And then I'm like, well, I'm not like on it for 3 or 4 hours at a time every single day. But what I realized is I was allowing myself to be interrupted at different times, whether it's work or at the dinner table,
Yes.
or watching a show with my wife and I'm kind of bored and I get on it. It has taken away from my ability to be present.
Yeah. And that's exactly it. It's a fantastic point because it's these little micro interruptions. There's something very deep. It's a whole rabbit hole, and it's something that appears in the book quite a lot. This idea of flow, getting into flow. I'll be honest with you. Right now, I have very little flow going on in my work because of lockdown and working from home. I usually work from coffee shops, and I find working from home exceptionally difficult. Really do. But in general, finding flow is where the magic is. And the reason I've been able to earn a lot more by doing a lot less is over the last few years is largely comes down to that notion. Quality over quantity. So rather than trying to do 5 or 6 different tasks a day, just doing 1 or 2, like having a core block 1, core block 2, and then a couple of little blocks later in the day for like review work or email catch up and stuff. But it's like I've got my morning task and my afternoon task centered. It's like flow. And whether you do get your work going for an hour or an hour and a half or 2 hours, you're getting quality out of it. And it's because you're removing these micro interruptions like Facebook, like email. Like I would just block them from my phone, block them from my computer for certain time things, because it removes the temptation and you're getting into that flow. You get the job done. It stops your brain from overthinking and questioning itself and comparing yourself to others. And yeah, I forget the exact science, but it's like once you get into flow, like a version of flow, and then you interrupt and move on to something else, it takes something like 20 minutes to just get back into the groove again. So if you think about you work, say 9 to 5, that's how many, it's like 8 hours. And you spend every half an hour, you find yourself picking up the phone. That basically means that every time, which is quite normal for most people, what that tells you is you're just getting yourself into some version of flow and then taking yourself back out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And you're building yourself back up and you're taking yourself out. And getting back into it is time consuming, right? It's like a car going from start to 10, 20 miles an hour. It takes up a lot of energy to get going. Once you go a steady pace of like 50 miles an hour along the motorway, you're not using up as much energy, as much petrol, as much energy, right? But all that stopping and starting takes up a lot of energy. You waste a lot of petrol that way. it's grinding gears and stuff. Like a car works better, as far as I know anyway, from the limited knowledge I have of cars, is that it works more efficiently when it's going at a set standard speed, about 50 miles an hour. Not too fast, not too slow, just constantly going. If you're stopping and starting all the time, you use up a lot of energy. Exactly the same for you. So if you're stopping and starting throughout the day with these little micro interruptions, you're using up a lot of energy. You're not getting into flow as much. You're getting yourself out to it more frequently. And you're just exhausted from it. So you get to the end of the day where it's like, I've been busy all day, but I don't feel like I've got anything done. And that's why.
You also said something at the very beginning of this that I want to take us back to, is that you talked about getting in and out of flow. But before we can even get into flow and there's interruptions, that I would say that's part two. Part one is the very first thing. You said you have a hard time getting into flow because you're at home on lockdown. And normally your flow comes from coffee shops and wherever you're at. So your environment is very key towards flow and your ability to get in and out. And, I'm looking right now at my environment. I've been building this environment for a very long time in my office. Those of you are watching on YouTube, this is not my real office. I got Matt to believe it was before we started.
Yeah, we started.
I
was like, oh my gosh, I want it.
I know. It was just like, wow, that's beautiful. It's just a picture. I have a blue green screen behind me. However, what I've realized is like, it's cluttered in my office. I don't feel like there's space. And really that's what you're talking about, is creating space in our schedule, creating space where we work, creating space and time and margin for us to be able to actually operate.
And it's not just the environment. It's a really great point. And it's something which comes part of the time audit when I've taught people how to do it in the past. It's getting a good appreciation of when and where. So, for instance, I mentioned earlier, my day in general is a little bit different right now in lockdown, but in general, sort of pre-COVID, I would have my morning slot, my afternoon slot, and kind of then my late afternoon slot. And it would just work for me. And the morning slot was my core work. Whether it was client work or whether it was working on my book, it's like you talk about color coding, that's the money, right? Mm-hmm. These are the 2 hours, 2.5, 3 hours that's where I'm earning my money, right? Important stuff. And I did it, and usually it would come between sort of about 9:30 and 12:30, because I've learned over the years that is when I am at my best. If I try to do anything too productive before 9:30, I'm just not with it. I haven't had a coffee. My head's not quite running yet. So, and if I try to work too late in the day, all I've got left is those 75% tasks. So those 100% tasks, bang, 9:30 till 12:30. If there's anything I do beforehand, it might be a little email catch up. It might be a call, which isn't as important. Little things, right? Or things around the house, exercise, things of that nature. Then my second slot will usually still be maybe money work, but it's more like strategy. It's something a little bit smaller. So maybe it's an article that I'm working on. It still requires my attention. It might be a 100% task, but it's not necessarily the money slot, right? And that might just be between sort of 1 and sort of 2:30. Might just be an hour and a half. And then the final slot, it's just catch up filler work. It's for those 75% tasks. And it might be an hour or 2 hours in between, picking up the kids or getting tea ready or whatever else. And that's when I do things like social media. That's when I'll, do things like email. That's when I'll have other calls. Because I know that my focus, when I do my best work, it's between 9:30 and 12:30. So if I'm doing email or social media or something that isn't essential between those hours, I am wasting my peak time. And I also know that my best work comes when I'm in a coffee shop. That's when I do. I work better in a coffee shop in most instances than then. So I know that I need to be up, ready, in a coffee shop, sat down by hopefully 9 o'clock. So I've got a little bit of time where I can enjoy my coffee, probably start working at 9:30ish. And it's not that I go like for a solid 2 or 3 hours. I'll have little breaks. I might walk from one coffee shop to the next, after like an hour and a half, just to break things up, recharge, and then zone back in. But for me, the when is 9:30 till 12:30. The where is coffee shops. Now for you, it could be totally different. Some people are night owls. Some people get their best work done at 9 o'clock at night till midnight. That is absolutely fine. That's why I think some people get this misconception when I come, like I'm all about the anti-hustle. I hate the hustle. So they assume that if, it doesn't mean having a good morning routine, or if they work all-nighters and stuff, that it means that I'm anti-against them. It's like, no, like the hustle is the constant grind. It's the working for the sake of working. It's the doing more because you feel like you need to do more. Now, if you work my exact kind of routine, but yours is flipped, and you find you do your best work at like 9 till midnight, and all the work you do in the afternoon needs to be that filler work because your brain just doesn't register it, then that's absolutely fine. Just because you work until midnight doesn't mean you're caught up in the hustle. That just means you're a night owl. Likewise, I know some writers in particular who wake up, they love to wake up early, and they do their best writing straight out of bed. So they're waking up at 5 o'clock, they're sat down writing at like 5:30 till 7:30, and that's them basically done for the day. And again, if that's how it works for you, if that's how your brain works, go for it. It's all about appreciating when and where that peak state is.
It's so good. Tell us, as we're wrapping up here, some things from the book that we haven't talked about that you might want to add in before we go.
Well, the book is as I say, it's a business fable, so a bit of a kind of modern equivalent of The Alchemist, aimed at sort of the millennial generation. And I'm an older millennial, but I'm just about clinging on to it. So it follows Ferdinand, who's a very, very successful Silicon Valley entrepreneur. And the big key theme in there is that on the outside looking in, he's successful. He's the definition of success. And when he speaks to people, when he goes on a podcast, for instance, which is one of the early stages of the book, he goes on, he acts successful. He assumes he is successful. Yet early on in the book, he starts to realize that he's not happy and that he has actually been doing a lot of self-sabotage because he's assumed he knows what he wants to become a billionaire. He assumes that he's happy with what he has of success and fame. Yet he's never actually consciously decided what success means to him. So the big overarching premise of the book is this idea that most of us are pursuing a version of success that isn't ours. We are pursuing a version of success that was passed down to us from parents, from school, from the media, from society as a whole, following those shoulds and those coulds. And it's further fueled these days at an intense rate compared to previous generations because of social media, because of the internet, because the barriers to entry, as we talked about earlier, are so low and you can try everything without any risk. Because right now, I can pick up a phone, boom, I can just start checking the lives of other people, seeing how they live and going, wow, they have what I want. For instance, I mean, your background is a perfect example of it,
Yeah.
Straight away, the first thing I noticed was that background, straight away, like subconscious, my mind's going, I want that. Why have I not got that? You'll see that
I do that too.
Instagram. Yeah. But you didn't have to tell me that it was a fake background. I don't think I'm smart enough to have figured it out. It's that realistic.
Well, you could share it on. It looks really real.
Anyone listening, it looks real. But on Instagram, like people share these, in the fancy cars, and straight away you start going, "Wow, he's got a Lamborghini." not knowing that he's maybe just taken a picture of someone else's Lamborghini as he's passed it in the street, and it was taken 2 years ago. So you're constantly comparing yourself to others. So the overarching journey of the book is this idea of you can seem successful, but it doesn't mean that you'll feel successful. And Ferdinand's true journey is starting to realize how unsuccessful he actually is and feels. And as the journey progresses throughout the book, he starts to appreciate actually what success means to him. And it leads him down a rabbit hole. And this is just the first of 3 books. So it's going to be a trilogy. So it goes down the whole sort of personal development rabbit hole and touches upon things like flow and mindset and our relationship with mind, body, and spirit, and trust, and so many other aspects.
Interesting. Man, well, thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to ask you 3 questions to wrap this up, which I like to ask every one of our guests. In terms of negative self-talk, what lie are you currently telling yourself?
Negative self-talk. I think the biggest one is that I'm not productive at home. I think there's a sense of reality to that, but I don't think I'm as unproductive as I make out. I just use it as a bit of an excuse. That makes sense.
Yeah, totally. What brings you peace?
What brings me peace is, and this is something else which I've lost touch of recently, is a good morning routine. I love to ease myself into the day. Part of it is I've got a 3-year-old who hasn't slept for the last 3 years. So any sense of morning routine, as you know, easier said than done. It should start to get a little easier as she gets older, but I feel so much peaceful, so much more peaceful, should I say, if I wake up, not necessarily early, but if I allow my first hour to be productive in the sense of self. So I'm easing into the day, I'm listening to a bit of music, I'm breathing, not even meditation as such, I'm just kind of breathing, I'm stretching, I'm on my own. It's just like a quiet room, or I'm just listening to a bit of music or something. I can't tell you the difference it makes the rest of my day if I start that first hour in such a way.
What's the best decision you've ever made?
Oof. Does not murdering my kids count?
I love that. Yeah, that counts. No, it does not count.
It's an ongoing one. I honestly think the best decision I ever made was turning to writing as a form of therapy when I was just about 21. Because I wasn't an avid reader as a kid. I didn't take English beyond, the time when you had to take it. Not taught in that sense. But yeah, writing has had a fundamental shift of my life. Like it plays such a huge role in my life now, not just in the sense of my work, but how I reflect, how I think, how I am, how I be. So choosing to turn to writing then, yeah, I would be a different person today.
Awesome. Well, Matthew, man, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. How can people connect with you outside of listening to this interview?
Yeah, I would love to. So if you go to beyondbook.co, so that's .co, not .com, beyondbook.co, that will give you a greater insight into Beyond the Pale. It'll also link to a free sample of the book, the private Anti-Hustle Academy Facebook group that is linked to the book, as well as like my Facebook and Instagram. And when the book is available, it will also link to where you can grab yourself a copy. But I'd certainly encourage you to get the sample that's available from now, and you can get an idea of whether it's the book for you. So yeah, beyondbook.co.
Awesome. Matthew, man, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Likewise. Take care.